Well, welcome to Bible class this morning. I'm glad you're here. As you know, we're doing a quick romp through the Bible. It'll only take us 3 years, but we plan to get there from Genesis all the way through Revelation. Today, we're going to park ourselves at a study a little bit more about Joseph, the man that we talked about a bit last week. We're talking about Joseph, and this time being reunited with his father, Jacob. We know the story begins, the entire Jewish clan is in Egypt, where they'll eventually be held captive for the labor they provide. Moses is going to come on the scene in a few hundred years. He's going to lead them back out of captivity, all the way back to Palestine, where they originated. So we're going to pick up at the story today with him, with Moses in a couple of weeks. And today we'll talk about Jacob. Now, I don't know if you're as old as me, you probably remember trips to Grandma's house in the summertime, right? I had 4 sisters, and Mom and Dad would put us all in the car. She would take one of my youngest one, put her up front, and then the rest of us had to fight between who was going to get what real estate in the back seat. There were no seat belts at those days, but there simply never was enough room, it seems like. And I was the one that always rode in the space above the back seat, back in the back. Those cars used to have a big space back there. It was wonderful. That was my place. I would grab that and I would be there for the rest of the journey. Hot blazing sun, a car that had no air conditioning. All the windows were rolled down. And if it was raining, we especially hated it because both of our parents smoked. And so it was not necessarily a good and fun place to be. When we got to Grandma's house, of course, I remember watching a fuzzy TV, because that's all she had, and going outside, having to go up on the ladder, get up on the roof and twist the antenna to get the thing to come in just right and shout down to people below about, is it okay, is it okay? And then also having to go outside. Now, my grandma lived out in the country, and she had no plumbing in her house whatsoever. We had to use an outside toilet, I suppose you would call it, as an outhouse. A hole was in the seat of a door. You hated to go in there because there's always wasps hanging around up there. Hot in the summertime, stinky. Oh, you can't imagine. And we had such fun, though, you know. I used to take a bath in a tub out in the side of the house there on the outside where the sun had shined on it all day. That was as warm as the water got. Now, I'm really surprised that the 5 of us kids ever made it to adulthood, to be honest with you. So here are some do's and don'ts for the summertime travel, right? For starters, no matter how crowded it is inside, don't hang one of your kids outside the car as you drive down the road. Just don't do that. And how many times have you parents wished that the scene you see on the right here is what would happen in your car? It never happens though, right? It never happens. Pharaoh was pleased to have the family of Joseph join. Oh, wait a minute. I skipped a slide. This is my fun slide. That shouldn't happen. And this, though, is what actually happens, right? It's interesting that Joseph told his brothers not to quarrel on the way. Think about that. He's telling his brothers on the way, don't quarrel. This image is too soft and cuddly to depict what usually goes on in the back seat during an extended road trips. This is the image that the parents see, of course, tucked away in the spacious front seat up front. There's always one troublemaker. He's the one in the middle. He's causing trouble for both people on either side of him. And you have 2 very unhappy backseat siblings with him. But here is the children's view of the front seat. The mom has got her hands holding on to that steering wheel, thankfully. And she keeps the hands on that and not them. That's about the only thing that's keeping those kids alive, I'm pretty sure. Just being out of arm's reach there. Had this happened to Joseph at some point or another, it's odd that he told them, don't quarrel. He knew what was going to happen when the family got together. And of course, he knew his brothers well because they had sold him into slavery. Something that I had wanted to do with my sisters from time to time, I'm sure. I guess the family quarreling is universal. It even happens in the church family. James warns the early church, do not quarrel. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? James chapter 4. Well, you might imagine the trip from their home in Judea having been something like this. Though they would have come to Egypt in wagons that were pulled by animals instead of a nice fancy car like this. Perhaps it was a bit more like this, though. Jacob, the old man, finally giving in, gave permission to leave their homeland and move to Egypt to be near his son Joseph. Well, you can imagine the group as they loaded up the truck and they moved to they moved to the pyramids in Egypt. I was going to sing the Beverly Hillbilly song for you, but I think I'll forego that. No, I couldn't do it like Buster Flats and Earl Scruggs. I couldn't do that as well, so we'll leave it to them. I'm sorry?
We'll settle for bluegrass.
One more time. Okay, see
Bluegrass.
Bluegrass. Yeah, no. Thank you. No. Woo, Ray, thank you for that. Oh, you got a lot of courage, man. I got to tell you. So Jacob's family moved to Egypt for a little while. How did the family fare in Egypt? How did they do? Were they elevated in the hierarchy of the Egyptians because of their status that Pharaoh had given them? No. Did they amass great wealth while they were there? Some of them may have, but for the most part they didn't. Eventually they wind up being nothing but slaves to the Egyptians, if you can imagine the fate of the Jews having stretched so low. Eventually they were used for hard labor and they worked the ground. They were servants to the wealthy Egyptians, not even elevated at all over time. They were slave labor. Now, when did they return to Egypt? What's the next group of people person that we're going to talk about in the Bible that comes along and rescues them from Egypt? His name starts with an M and ends with an S. Moses, right. Moses is going to come along, but it's 430 years from the time we're talking about today before he comes on the scene and rescues them from the bondages that they found themselves in. God gave them assurance, though. He said, don't be afraid. You will become a great nation there, and I will go with you, and I will surely bring you back again. That's the hope that they could hold on to all the time that they were there, that God would one day come and get us and take us away from here. Do you have a comment?
Well, I was just going to say they were given Goshen when Jacob went, I believe. And so they could have done very well for a while. 400 years is a long time
Right.
to get into slavery. But I think by being separate, they may have done very well for a while.
They did for a while. There's no doubt about it. As long as Pharaoh's in place that loved Joseph from everything that Joseph did, and perhaps even the next Pharaoh, you never know. But after 2 or 3 of those, all of that goes away. And they were treated very poorly. They were slaves, if you will, all the way until Moses comes along and rescues them. But God told them, don't be afraid. You're going to become a great nation there, and I will bless you. And certainly he did. So before we continue, I want to stop now and ask you a question, because the next thing I'm going to ask you has to do with your Bible. Okay? What version of the Bible do you favor? I am NIV. I like the NIV. I like it because I can read it well. It just seems like good English to me. Not that I know good English, but I mean, it just seems that way. But some people like the Revised Standard Version. Some people hang with the King James Version and claim it to be the only version that's been authorized, so we'll do that one. Well, what version is your Bible? If you look at your version today, what would it say? New English Version? Okay.
Harding when I was there, and that was not yesterday, but Harding when I was there usually heard the Standard Version.
All right.
But I've always grown up on King James, and so fairly recently I started with
Right.
the New King James.
If you ask me to quote from the Bible, I'll probably give you the King James Version because I learned by those by heart, when I was growing up. But I like the New International Version myself. Here's a question, though. Who wrote the version that you're using? When was it written? On what ancient texts does the Bible that you're looking at take and derive its English that you're reading? Was your version translated to English from Latin, Hebrew, Greek, even Aramaic? Would it be possible you think about having a Bible that's translated from Aramaic? How much do you know about the scribes that we call the Masoretes because they lived in an area near Jerusalem that was called that? The scribes of Masoretes who worked for Tiberius in Jerusalem in about 10 to 6 BC. You know much about what they did? They translated the Bible, and if you're reading the New International Version, you're reading pretty much what they translated. See, we don't know an awful lot about the history of it all and all the different versions of the Bible and how they came to be, but we love the version that we've selected and we go with. How about the Septuagint? Do you know much about the Septuagint? Do you even know what that word means? Sept is the month of, well, no, I won't go there because that doesn't seem right. But Septuagint, any ideas? LXX. You were there. I mean, you should
It's a Greek translation. It's for a Greek audience, not a Hebrew. And Septuagint, does that mean 10 or 12 or something? There were X number of people that were chosen to do the translating, but I've forgotten the number.
I will be Septuagint not very many years from now. Septuagint means 70. 70.
70 scholars.
70 scholars, according to tradition, were called into a hotel. Each was given a room, a bedroom. It was their own room, only them. They were the only ones in the room. They were also given a copy of the Bible, and they were told to write this in Greek. And so they started with Genesis 1 and went all the way through the end of the Old Testament. That is the Septuagint version. It's called the LXX for a reason. LXX, if sometimes you see the LXX and they're talking about the Septuagint. LXX is in Roman numerals 50 plus 10 plus 10, or 70, because 70 scholars came together and created this version of the Bible. You know much about the Latin Vulgate version? We're thankful for Jerome, who came around later, and Jerome took the Bible and translated it out of the Greek, put it in Latin. He put it in a language that people of the day could understand. He put it in Greek, if you will. The people of the day could understand. Pardon me, no, he put it in Latin. All right, so just to give you a clue, the Septuagint version is listed here on the left. It was the original Hebrew Pentateuch text, only the first 5 books of the Bible. 70 scholars translated it like we talked about. To the Jews, it is unchanged and it is infallible. They understand the Septuagint better than any other version that's out there. The Latin Vulgate came along thanks to Jerome. He took it and translated it, and he didn't use the Septuagint. He went back to the original letters that they used when they did the Septuagint and translated that into Latin. Not until 600 AD, the Masoretic text came into being, up until about 1000. They took the original Hebrew text as well. The Masorete Jews then took it and translated it into a version that they used back then. Most of our newer versions, like the King James Version and the New International Version, use that to give us the version that we're reading today in the English that we understand. The Targums were an Aramaic translation, and they happened in about the same time that the Masoretic text was converted. So that's a little bit of a history, telling you a little bit about the background of the Bibles that we read today in English. We just take it for granted it was written in English, right? It wasn't. It really wasn't. So, the reason I'm going through all of that is to ask you this. How many people came out of Egypt? How many people came to Egypt from Israel on this trip? Well, it depends upon your Bible. It depends upon the version of your Bible, of course. And if you read these verses, you'll see that the King James Version, the New International, New Standard, Masoretic, and Vulgate kind of agree, but the Septuagint doesn't agree. The Septuagint says 75 people came back out of Egypt, came to Egypt out of Israel. And the other versions all say 70. Now, think about that. Here's the Bible, infallible Word of God, and you have 2 versions of that number. Does that make you scared a little bit about the possibility of translation errors and so forth in the Bible? Make you think anything about that? I don't think you should be. I really don't. But nonetheless, there are some discrepancies between versions of the Bible, and just in terms of numbers. Go home and look it up. I'm sure you've got at least a couple of these different copies of the Bible Look up and see how many people came. You will see it's either 70 or 75 people, so we're not quite sure exactly how big this family was when they came over there. When they got halfway along the journey, Jacob was sent ahead. Sent Judah, one of the older brothers, ahead of them to go get directions for where our new home is going to be. They left on faith that when they got there, they were going to have land, but they had no clue where it was, didn't have a clue what it looked like, didn't know if it was going to be good pasture ground for their sheep and cattle or if it was going to be lousy land. So they sent Judah, and lo and behold, Judah came back and said, "You're not going to believe where Pharaoh is sending us. You're going to be really happy when you get there because the land, it looks wonderful for grazing sheep." It was the delta of the Nile, the most fertile ground, very watered, and very suited for farming and livestock. And so when the group finally got there, they finally made their way up to Goshen. And when they got there in the delta of the Nile, that's where they met their brother Judah, who had already been there. Now, we can't imagine, I'm sure, the anxiousness that Joseph felt waiting for his father to come, you know. I can't tell you how many times Grandpa let us know that he was coming and how long it took for him to get from where he lived all the way up to the little town of Marvel where we lived, and we just couldn't wait for him to get there. That's nothing compared to the way Joseph must have felt about seeing his father. Now, we can know Joseph's age from how old he was at the time. Joseph was 30 when he entered Pharaoh's service, right? Immediately after he started working, what happened? There were 14 years, 7 of famine, 7 of prosperous, 7 prosperous times and 7 years of famine. Well, we know that 2 years of famine had already passed by the time Jacob got there, so we can put those numbers together. We can infer that Joseph was 39 years old when Jacob arrived in Egypt. And so Jacob would have been 130 years old. The old man and his family then lived in Egypt for 17 years before Jacob died. He lived to be a nice old age of 147. I don't think I have the fortitude to want to even live that long, I guess. I don't know. 147 years. Seems like a lot of history there. But Joseph readies Jacob and the group. Before the group meets Pharaoh, they know they're going to get a chance to see Pharaoh and be in an audience with him. And Joseph wants to give them some protocol, tell them what to do and what not to do. Please don't spit on the floor. That would not be perceived nice. When they offer you something, bow and say thank you or whatever you're going to do. Be nice, use your manners, so to speak. It's what we always told our children, though they never did it. And this ensured that Pharaoh, what they told him and what he told them to tell Pharaoh was this: we are shepherds. We've been shepherds ever since we were born. We understand the shepherding business. That's what we do. When Pharaoh said, "What do you do?" they said, "We are shepherds." Well, that ensured that Pharaoh would give them the right plot of land for them to live in that was very good for all the sheep and the cattle that they were bringing in. But very few Egyptians lived up there in this beautiful place. There are palm trees and there's water. It's water galore up there. Yet they choose to live in the dry part down around the Nile River, not up there in the delta for some reason. So brothers finally meet Pharaoh, telling him that we're shepherds. And he said, "You will live in Goshen, and you will tend your flocks. And oh, by the way, if you have somebody who's able, send him to me because I want him to manage my flocks as well." And so Pharaoh put him to work, from day one. Well, Pharaoh has an opportunity to meet the old man, Jacob, at this time. Now, in his greeting, the Bible tells us that Jacob blessed the Egyptian monarch. Think about that. An old man, 90 years old or more, no money at all, coming on his knees, begging Pharaoh for a place to live. And he turns around, the first thing he does is bless Pharaoh. Now, Pharaoh probably is thinking, why is this old man blessing me? How can he bless me? Of all people, I'm the greatest in the world. And here's Joseph coming along and blessing him. But we do know that Pharaoh knew that he had been blessed because of this old man through his son. He knew that Joseph had done a wonderful job for him. And so he blessed him, and I'm sure Pharaoh took it with grace, or I'm assuming that he did.
But,
Yes, sir.
the Egyptians and the Pharaoh are obsessed by something. And it's age and living forever. They were really into living forever. Look at all that they left. Everything you see if you go to Egypt today has to do with life that you ever happened. Yes. And what was the first question that the Pharaoh asked Jacob?
How old are you?
Yeah, that was his.
That was
first
what his
question.
curiosity was. Oh, okay.
Because do you know something I don't know?
Yeah. Interesting.
The issue, when the Hebrew people came before Pharaoh or came into Egypt, there was one colossal issue there that they had to live with, contend with, or something, is hair.
It was what?
Hair.
Hair?
Hair.
Hair.
The Egyptians didn't have it. They didn't use it. And the Hebrew people had lots of hair.
Oh, okay.
And hair was kind of an abomination. That was something, I wonder how they got through it. I guess the Egyptians overlooked it. I doubt if the Hebrew people shaved all their hair off, their face and their head, like the Egyptians.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the.
It did separate them from the rest of the people in Israel, didn't it?
You know, that's a fairly permanent concern. When I was raising my two sons, a generation apart basically, but both of them had hair problems. You know, as far as I was concerned, they had way too much of it.
You were the only one that had the problem.
Exactly right.
I've had the problem too.
We're all familiar, being from Arkansas, about the Mississippi River and the Mississippi River Delta, right? Just to the south of us and the state below us is the Delta. The river nears the ocean. It breaks out into smaller tributaries and expands. And it goes everywhere, all directions, it seems like, when it gets down close to the water. The soil here is rich with nutrients. It's excellent for farming. All of the tributaries are loaded with fish and wildlife, but it's also prone to consistent and constant flooding. Man-made levees down there in the Mississippi River Delta are everywhere you go. You run into a levee, and it floods a lot down there. Now, there's a lot of similarity between what we're really familiar with to the land just below us to the south. We're familiar with the Delta, and there was a lot of familiarity with us. We understand then what it was like in the Delta of the Nile. It was pretty much like this: constant flooding, great places to grow crops and things, very much a lot of water. It's interesting, though, that in North America, the water runs from the north to the south because it's trying to get down to the equator because the earth is spinning this way. Well, on the south, the water flows up to the equator and it goes the other direction. That's about one of the only differences between really the Delta in Mississippi and the Delta of the Nile. Goshen means lush and verdant. It's very much like Mississippi, suitable for farming and grazing cattle. The storehouses were in a nearby place called Ramses. You can see it, it's a little red mark up there. You may not be able to read it. But Ramses, Jacob and his family lived then in Goshen, which is very close to Ramses, for about 17 years. And here the Israelites became a great nation. They actually lived there for a lot longer than that, 130 years. Well, we know about Jacob's foresight. He knew that famine was coming. In fact, his father and brothers came at the very start of that, been 2 years into it when they came. And there was prophesied to be 7 years worth of that famine going on. Well, Joseph had the foresight to do this. First, he collected money from anybody that needed grain, right? Pay me money and you get some grain. And he collected money, and he did that until the money ran dry. Sooner or later, the banks were broke. There was no money. So what did Joseph do? What did he trade them for then? He traded them for animals, which was a good thing for him to do. He traded them for animals. You bring me a cow, I'll give you some grain. Well, he did that, and then what happened? The animals dried up, right? No money, no animals, what do? Well, at that point, Joseph bought them. He couldn't buy their animals anymore, so he bought them. They became slaves to him. He gave them grain. They would take it back home and raise the grain. And he would collect 1/5 of their crops. So they started farming for the state, really, for Pharaoh. And this law of crops was in place all the way up to the time that Moses is going to come 450 years later. So Joseph was pretty smart. Not only did he prepare for that through the 7 years, but he also managed it very well as it went on. The Israelites in Goshen were blessed. They acquired a considerable property holder. They became property holders. They expanded their territory. They also were very prolific, right? It's said that the Hebrew women could drop a baby at the drop of a hat, you know. I mean, babies were just constantly coming from them. By the time of Moses, that was true. They were also very prolific and produced offspring in great numbers. In Goshen, the Israelites grew to a huge number, a great nation of people down there. They grew tremendously. The consensus holds that about 2 million people are going to leave there when Moses comes along just a few years later. 2 million people just in those few years. Jacob created a very difficult problem for Joseph near the end of his life. Jacob said, "When I die, don't bury me down here in Egypt. Don't put me in this sandy ground. Take me back to Canaan and bury me there." Jacob made Joseph place his hand under his thigh, and he sat on his hand. Have we heard that before? Where did we hear someone asking his servant to put his hand under his thigh and making a promise? Boy, I taught this class and you guys don't remember that?
It was when your dad was meeting a wife. When he was meeting a wife,
Well, it is for Isaac.
Abraham asked his servant Eleazar.
That's right.
Eleazar, who was the foreman of his estate, to put his hand over his leg, which was the symbolizes strength.
Okay.
The leg was
The strength of the body. Okay. Anyway, it's an odd thing if your grandpa calls you in and says, "Put your hand under my thigh." I would be afraid to do that. Then we do this. We do this today. I promise. I promise I'm going to do that. Cross your heart. Well, that was crossing their heart, if you will. They just didn't know where it was at that time. So Jacob did that. He put his hand underneath his thigh, and the old man said, "When I die, don't bury me down here in Egypt. I don't want that. Take me back to Canaan and bury me there like a good Jew would be buried." And soon Joseph is going to have to make good on that promise, but it was trouble for him. He had to get the procession ready. He had to get the man ready. He had to take them back over there into Canaan. You know, there's no evidence of Israel at all ever living in houses in Egypt. Today, if you ask someone who's really into it, they would tell you, we've not found any evidence that any Jews ever lived there. We haven't found any evidence of any Jews living in that area. There's very little evidence about it. But there is one tell that I will tell you about, a tell called Tel el-Daba. And Tel el-Daba, they've been studying that since 1966. Now, you'd think they would have dug enough holes by now to find something that would say, this is no doubt the Jews were here. They haven't found it yet, though, still. Although they found some corroborative evidence. I will tell you the architecture is consistent with a date that's appropriate, puts them in about the 19th century BC. And at least they're getting in the right year for that. The location is accurate because it's up around near Goshen, and that's where the Israelites were. The homes there are not typical Egyptian construction. Instead, there are 4 rooms in each home. Sometimes you had 2 rooms below and 2 rooms up on top. Sometimes you had 4 rooms altogether. 4 rooms seem to be the magical number for as many rooms as you need in a house for the Israelites. And these houses all that they found so far have 4 rooms. So they're beginning to see a little bit of common sense here that says, yeah, maybe this is where Goshen was, and maybe these are some of the Jews who were there. They've even found a sarcophagus of a very rich man. Genesis chapter 50, 26 tells us of one man who's going to be buried there. He's going to be placed and interred there. But some may think this may have been Joseph's original Egyptian burial site, but no one will cop to it. No one will be strong enough with enough fortitude to say, you know what, this is really proving what the Bible said. Moses is going to come to a place similar to this, if not this, to get Jacob's and Joseph's bones and to bring them back with him when he goes back to Canaan, where he puts them in a place called the tomb at Machpelah. We've talked about Machpelah in here before. So at this site, the Tel El Dabah, again, uncorroborated evidence of the Jews' possible existence there. It's not been confirmed, though. Egypt will not allow that any Jews, and Egypt does not even allow Jews today on any excavation site in Egypt. There are no Jewish scholars at all at any of these sites. Egypt will forbid them to come there. Still, there's some evidence, and so far it does seem fairly compelling. There's a lot of writing about a group called Habiru. Habiru. Doesn't that sound like Hebrew? It does to me, but it's not. It's not supposedly the Hebrews as we know them, but another nation. Go figure.
That's what the word means, sojourner.
Sojourner.
The word Hebrew means sojourner, one who is
Traveler.
permanent in the land but is passing through.
Passing through, okay. Next time
It was first referred to Abraham.
Next time I teach this, that there will be a slide in here that says that, and I'll give myself credit for it, just so you know. So what do we learn from Jacob's story, Joseph's story? Well, jealousy can ruin a relationship, right? I have 4 friends. I have friends who all say mom and dad played favorites, right? Did mom and dad play favorites in your family? Is it true, your own family in which you grew up? Is this true in families even today? Secondly, Joseph was stripped of his coat, but he was not stripped of his character. And I think of no man in our history had more character, I think, than Abraham Lincoln. And so I think of him as a person of physical and also mental and moral strength. Joseph's story also tells us to be diligent workers. Joseph certainly made things happen, and a quote from Michael Jackson would have been his. Some people want it, some people want it to happen, some wish it would happen, and others make it happen. And that's what Joseph did.
I'm sorry. I don't think Joseph had any character when he went to Egypt.
It was all developed there?
He was a spoiled rat, talking off about his dreams. His father kept him home. His father dispatches him to see about his brother, but you don't do that.
Yeah.
You don't put one brother up. Joseph was not an admirable character but his experiences, it's a beautiful story of how character develop. And it's developed through hard times and et cetera.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the way all of us are developed.
Right.
You don't develop character in a perfect living arrangement. You develop character
From struggle.
You know, a hard knock here and there,
Yeah.
tough times, a little self-imposed discipline, which he had to impose on himself. But I just think Joseph is one of the greatest characters in the Old Testament, but it was developed. It didn't come from Jacob's house.
No, it came from God, too. God had his hand in the development of the man, Joseph, for sure. Well, it also tells us that we should ask God to protect us in times of trouble. He was quickly a man of prayer. We need help. We should ask God to protect us. We should learn that we need to run from sin at all costs. Sin can mess up everything. Regardless of the financial costs, regardless of the effort required or the mental fatigue that it may cause you, we should find enough strength within us to flee from sin. Always. 6, we should always ask God for his blessing. Just like the Pharaoh asked for blessing and he was blessed, we should ask God for blessing. God, bless me in this or that. Ask God to help us and ask him to bless you as well. And finally, we need to find a way to choose forgiveness over resentment. This is one struggle that I have in my life, and I'm 66 years old. It amazes me how discontent I am when I think about my family life growing up, when I grew up, and the relationship I had with my sisters and my mom and dad. I struggle even today with forgiveness, though my mom and dad have since passed away. So don't be like me, though. My wife is certainly not like me. She is not like me at all. That's the only reason we're together today, and I'm blessed in that regard, that's for sure. She's a great one who chooses forgiveness over resentments. Otherwise, we probably would not be married even today. So I love her to death. Let her know that, just to tell you. Well, thank you very much. If you don't have any questions, I'll let you go. Otherwise, if you have questions, I'll hang around. I've enjoyed talking with you about this, and we'll pick up there in the Bible in our next story, the story that follows Jacob. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You bet.